So a huge welcome to you all. I'm Ree, the MD of the Heart Movement, and it's my great pleasure this evening to welcome Michael Bready, who's the MD and founder of Youth Mindfulness, which is a charity devoted to developing and delivering mindfulness programs for children, adolescents, and young adults. He's been a passionate practitioner of mindfulness for over 16 years. He holds a graduate degree in studies in mindfulness from the University of Aberdeen and a master's in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. So he founded Youth Mindfulness 10 years ago and has taught mindfulness to thousands of children, teenagers and young adults, as well as trained hundreds of educators. He led the development of the first mindfulness program for young men in prison in Scotland in partnership with the University of Glasgow, and he's taught mindfulness to members of the Scottish Parliament, which would have been an interesting story. His current passion is exploring what science is telling us about human nature and how this can lead us to a brighter, wiser, and more humane future. So it's a real pleasure to have you with us this evening, Michael. Thank you for your time. So,
thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Hearing the bio read out is not very pleasurable.
No, I think it's kind of nice to set the scene as to your background, and I know it's not.
I know. It's a kind of necessary evil, isn't it? You always have to do. You know?
Absolutely. So I just want to share. So our format for this evening is that Michael's going to lead us with a short meditation to start. Then we're going to dive into our exploration of the impact of mindfulness on youth. There'll be a chance for questions and answers from everyone, and we'll also end with a short meditation with Michael. So feel free to use reactions on Zoom or type questions in the chat box as we go along, but we do ask you to stay on mute throughout so that the recording is clear and crisp. So without further ado, I hand over to you, Michael, to lead us in a short meditation.
Okay, no problem. So maybe before we even begin meditation, we can have a sense of, just as we're here on the screen, and sometimes I think when we spend a lot of time on screens, and these days we're spending a lot of time on Zoom, and there can be a sense of almost a separateness in that, or some kind of distance in that. So maybe just for a moment, even before we begin the practice, or we could even take this intention into the practice, is to maybe allow any sense of distance that might be there to kind of fall away, and kind of come to the realization that we're kind of entering a space together. We're kind of coming into this space together, even though we might be separated by hundreds of miles or maybe thousands of miles in some case. We're still together in this space, so we can come into with that intention, and maybe a feeling of connectedness actually to everybody that's come here with a common purpose, common intention can emerge. So if you want to find a way of sitting that feels kind of comfortable and stable, we can start with the sound of the bell, and I'll just guide us through just a kind of gentle practice into connection to the body. It might be nice to begin this practice with some deeper breaths. Maybe with the sense of the in-breath carrying awareness kind of out of the head and down into the body. Into connection with how the body feels. The rising of the belly, the expansion of the lungs. And with the out breath, maybe noticing how the body kind of settles a little bit as it breathes out. The out breath is a kind of letting go. And then when you're ready, allowing the breath to find a natural rhythm. And just as the body lets go of the out breath, maybe it's possible for the mind to let go of what's gone before today, or whatever might emerge later. And just arrive into the here and now, into the experience of this moment, just as it is. Now allowing awareness to gently expand, embrace all the cells, all the muscles of the body, almost as if the in-breath carries awareness, every region of the body. And with the out-breath, the body can have the chance to rest. Maybe feeling the gentle force of gravity operating on the body. Almost inviting the muscles of the body to ease and soften.
Thank you. That's better. Yeah. So it's interesting the way that you led us with that, in so much that it is connection is the thing that we've lost, isn't it, with the pandemic over the last year. And you know, it's great that there's still this opportunity to connect in cyberspace with Zoom. Yeah, kind of intrigued as to the link between connection and mental health, but maybe we'll cover that in our talk today, especially around young people, because obviously it's a real key time for being in connection with friends and peer groups and things. So I wanted to lead off with, it's not an easy question to ask actually, but how do you feel COVID has impacted young people? What's been your experience this last year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been challenging, being extremely challenging, you know. I think one of the unfortunate things is we won't really know the true impacts or the outcomes of this for some time.
No.
You know?
No.
So, you know, one of the impacts of stress, or what we know about the brain, is the brain's kind of like an organ of habit, you know. So once it kind of starts spinning in a certain direction, or a certain kind of habit starts to be activated, a certain kind of seed is planted, if you like. We don't really know. It might be hard at this point in time to see what the fruit of that seed will be, you know. So yeah, my sense is that it's been challenging, extremely challenging for young people. I mean, on the flip side of that, we have a lot of graduates of our programs who work in child and adolescent mental health services. And some of the things that we had when at the beginning of the lockdown experience was that a lot of the young people that they worked with were relieved that school wasn't actually going on,
Right.
because school was such a big source of stress.
Yeah.
And that's something that we see we've seen a lot in our work with the summer program that we offer. We've worked a lot with young people who kind of fall into this bracket where they might be struggling, but their issues their struggles are not so severe that they'll meet the kind of criteria to be seen by CAMHS, by Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. Some parts of the country, the wait list for CAMHS is like 18 months.
Yeah.
But and even with the mental health challenges they might be presenting with, they just wouldn't get onto the wait list anyway. But there could be, you know, 30-40% of the population of you know, adolescents might be struggling in some way, and there's not really so much provision for them, you know. I remember one thing that really influenced the development of our summer program was some of the research on adverse childhood experiences. And these are these experiences of adversity that that impact actually so many of us, you know. I think the statistics are something like 50% of people will have experienced one adverse childhood event by the time they're 18.
Yeah.
And these things, some of you may know the studies. There's a kind of 10. There's 10 adversities that make the list, you know, and they kind of grouped into 3 categories: kind of abuse, neglect, and some form of childhood dysfunction. They don't include, actually, importantly, they don't include in bullying. They don't include bereavement. So there's other forms of stressors that are not included within that. But yeah, 50% of young people experience one of those things before they're 18. So one thing that kind of emerged to us in our work was that the trauma and adversity and stress in young people is not some uncommon kind of aberration that afflicts just a few poor souls. It's actually endemic. It's actually kind of runs through. It's very much a lived experience for many, many young people. And one of the things that we also find a lot in our work, and this is a bit more for adolescents than the little kids, you know, so more for the high school rather than primary schools, was that school was a massive source of stress to young people. And the fear of judgment. Yeah. Fear of judgment. One of the questions that we often ask when we start our work with young people is, do you ever feel judged? And we ask them, you know, what stresses you out? And that's kind of, we always find that that's quite an easy way in. Like it's a kind of question that you ask, and anybody can tell you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what stresses me out. You know,
Yeah.
because everybody loves to complain. You know what I mean? You know what stresses me out?
Yeah.
That stresses me out. And my English teacher, he gets. Oh, right, you know. So we always find, like, when we're meeting with people, young people for the first time, we often look for ways to start to just kind of warm up the conversation, warm up the space, so that like interaction can start to happen. You know. And so we would ask this question, you know, what stresses you out? And we'd also ask the question, do you ever feel judged? Do you ever feel judged in school? And how do you feel judged? And often the young people almost always have many different sources of stress in their life. School's almost always one of them. What in terms of judgment, they often feel judged from their peers. They often feel very judged. Often, actually, quite a lot of young people feel judged by their teachers, and a lot of young people feel, I think, judged by the education system itself. Again, especially once they get into those kind of adolescent years. So that was that's the kind of one thing that I thought was surprising to me when I heard it. That actually some young people actually felt relieved not to have to go to school.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the peer pressure is huge, and I think with social media as well now, you know, that adds another layer. So they can have relief from not being at school, but there's still this, you know, on the visuals that, you know, and the comparison that happens on all of the social media platforms. I think it's quite, you know, there isn't a time that you can kind of go away and be a hermit, which is sometimes what's needed, isn't it, in these times, really. I was looking at the Prince's Trust Youth Index just came out today, and it was saying that half of 16 to 25-year-olds say their mental health has worsened since the start of the pandemic. And and 1 in 4 admitting that they can't cope with life since the pandemic. So I think there's probably two lots of people. There are those that are really enjoying, you know, the stopping the world, the aspect of being able not to be at school, and then there is, you know, if someone's got one of those 10 life experiences happening that you mentioned earlier, and they're at home and they're in that situation still, you know, that's extreme then, isn't it, really? There's no escape from that. Whereas, you know, if you're in a difficult childhood situation, school can often be a place to be to hide. You know.
Totally. I think this is the other thing that's slightly, you know, concerning about, I think for young people, is that there's in some ways, I think things can be more manifest with adults in the challenges they experience. Like you can see quite concretely, like maybe divorce rates have gone up during the lockdown, you know. I saw something just the other day about a divorce lawyer in America talking about her business has gone up 6 times. 600% increase, you know.
Wow.
So you can imagine how challenging that is for. There was a report out a few months ago in Scotland, drug deaths are at their highest they've ever been. You know, so we I think the kind of extreme experience for adults it's seen very, very concretely, but for young people, they don't maybe they can kind of, I think, suffer a bit more in silence. You know?
That's my worry as well, because, you know, I think as an adult you kind of spiral out and play out more than you can when you're, especially when you're younger, like as opposed to kind of young kind of 20-year-olds, but like your 10-year-olds, your 9-year-olds, it's like that's a very tricky age, isn't it? And I know quite a few friends who've got children who are really struggling right now because their kids are really angry, and their personality has changed because they're kind of confined and they're not seeing their friends, etc. So So have you kind of tailored your offerings with the pandemic? Or are you finding that there are different needs that are coming up?
Well, I mean, most of our work just is kind of focused towards training other educators, you know. So that's what we've kind of focused on in the last couple of years. We worked to give the kind of background in youth mindfulness. I started developing the Youth Mindfulness Kids program, I think about 8 or 9 years ago, and we worked in that for a long time. And that's like a 16 lesson program for primary school kids. And then I worked with young men in prison for a number of years, and then also worked more and more with young people in different contexts, so in high schools and in kind of community context, youth groups, that kind of context, and developed our summer program. Which in the summer program, we developed the summer program to be kind of this flexible, responsive approach, because what we found in working with adolescents, that the kind of divergence, if you like, of the way the groups present is much greater than with the younger kids. I'm not entirely sure the reasons for that. I don't really know. I can hazard a guess there might be different reasons, but when you work with 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds and you go in with 30 of them in a classroom, there's what we found that we kind of came to this program, it kind of worked again and again and again. It needs a little bit of differentiation here and there, but for the most part, you can teach it again and again and again. What we found what we found actually, and it was kind of took a long time for the penny to drop. It's kind of a bit stupid, I think, looking back on my part. But we were really trying to find this kind of like standardized approach that would work for all adolescents. What we found was that, teaching 13-year-olds at risk of dropping out of school, or working with 16-year-olds before their exams, or working with a group of boys who get behavioural issues, or working with a group of girls who might have social anxiety issues, or kind of like bullying or cliquiness happening on social media. These groups are so different. They try and come up with a kind of standardized program that you're just going to roll out to everything. We just found eventually we discovered, this doesn't work. Yes. You need something that you can kind of flow with what's emerging.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, and the other thing that we found that was really, really vital in this work was a relationship, building the relationship with the young people, rather than just going in and focusing on content. So, in a mindfulness course, generally speaking, what one does is focuses on teaching various concepts or practices or principles that relate to mindfulness, broadly defined, So it might be some stuff on neuroplasticity. It might be mindfulness of breathing and what that practice is all about. It might be the attitude of allowing or letting be, and the idea that can actually be quite liberative as a way to relate to our experience. But what we found, with teenagers is that they are so used to people talking at them. Yeah. They're so used to people saying to them, this is what you should do, or this is what's important for you to learn, or whatever it may be. Yeah. And we even found that some of the analogies that are used in mindfulness to try and kind of hook people into it, like one I actually remember, was it Will Young, I think, the singer, a pop singer, he talked about mindfulness. I remember seeing a video being like brushing your teeth for mental health. Just something you do on a regular basis, and it's like good mental health hygiene, just like brushing your teeth is good dental hygiene. And that's like a really good analogy. I think that's like a nice analogy. I think that works. That makes a lot of sense. It's not inspiring for young people.
No, they don't really want to clean their teeth either. So,
they don't want to brush their teeth anyway. Young people want to take drugs and get drunk and go out and go mad with it. You know what I mean? So coming up and saying things like you should eat your 5 a day and you should brush your teeth and you should do exercise and you shouldn't spend it. It's all this you should. So what we found was that actually just having more of an emphasis on listening to them and just connecting, and in our summer program we have lots of activities that kind of facilitate that, that we kind of start to introduce or start to explore these themes, but with a view towards interaction, connection, discussion, rather than kind of just sharing this is what you should do, And in terms of how this is kind of adapted for this kind of over the last year. One of the things that we had to work on was adapting our own delivery model for training, because that's mostly what we focus on now. And so that was quite a big effort to go from like a kind of analog, offline, in a training room, welcome people to a 5-day course and go for it, to like delivering by Zoom, and then also developing this learning platform that we have. So that was a big part of our work. But what we found in our conversations with teachers who are out there delivering our program and working with young people, they're finding that it works really pretty well over Zoom. Really pretty well. And I must say, I'm a bit hesitant about that. I'm a bit fearful about what direction this might lead. You know, I think there's so much enthusiasm about technology, and there's people talking about how technology is going to transform education and all that kind of stuff. And I just think rushing to do like all mindfulness training for young people, like in an online format, or like after school Zoom class, I think if anything, and this is just, I'm obviously biased, I would say like teaching something like maths in a digital online format, in a kind of gamified way, in a really engaging kind of software game program thing.
Yeah.
I could see that be like, I would imagine, I'm not an expert in this, but I would imagine that could be deeply engaging and really supportive of a young person's learning, because it's kind of a cerebral thing.
Yes. Yeah.
But with mindfulness practice, and especially even, I would say, well, with the young kids as well, it's just as much, but very much with the adolescents, because there's more complexity in teaching adolescents.
Yeah.
I think of every group, a quick divergence, I would say the kids are often the easiest to teach.
Yeah.
I think young offenders in prison are actually the second easiest.
Okay.
Because if you set your sights low, right? Because they don't sit there like some adolescents, like just not talking to you. They'll let you know exactly what they think of you and exactly what you think of mindfulness. So you get something to work with.
Yeah.
MSPs are harder. Members of Parliament are harder than young offenders.
That doesn't surprise me.
I'll leave that. But I think adolescents, depending on the group, can sometimes be the most challenging. And you have to really work at an embodied level. You have to work at the level of intuition, of perception, of Stephen Porges, who developed polyvagal theory, which is a theory of our physiology and how it can be really severely impacted by trauma, and how we really need safeness. It talks about neuroception, how our bodies are these kind of almost like this sensory apparatus where we pick up where another person's at. So if you meet somebody and you feel butterflies in your stomach or an uneasiness, you feel it in your body, you don't know why, but your body's picking up on something in that person, and your body's flashing alarm bells saying, maybe don't trust this person, or maybe be careful.
Yeah.
So I think working with adolescents, you're working at a very, very embodied level.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I feel like this kind of work should be done in an in-person, face-to-face context, because I think especially as we move into the future, there's this kind of so much pressure to just be to be connected to screens all the time. And I think what the science is showing us is how deeply wired we are for interconnection. And one of the things that I feel very passionate about is that education, like I really feel like new stories are emerging about what it means to be human, what's possible for human beings, and that these stories need to animate the way we go about education. And I think that would be contrary to what the science is showing us, to how fundamentally important social connection is for human beings.
Would you just say a little bit more about what new stories you see emerging there? Because
Well, I think a really simple one, a really obvious one that is very common and known in the mindfulness world is neuroplasticity. So up until about it was in the mid-70s when the finding of neuroplasticity first emerged, that the brain can change its structure. Not just its activity, but it's actually the wiring of the pathways in response to experience.
Yeah.
So up until that point, most neuroscientists thought by the time you reached early adulthood, your brain had done all the changing and growing it was going to do, and it was just going to decay until you died. They kind of operated on this computer model, like a computer just processes information, but it kind of decays over time. You know, it's not a living, growing, evolving thing. So we had this kind of mechanistic story about the human brain, and what's emerging now is a more organic story about the human brain. I think a much more humane and uplifting story. So I think, and what we're also discovering is that this is also true for aspects that are important to well-being. So whether it's character strengths, whether it's a propensity for kindness, compassion, non-judgment towards yourself, whether it's a propensity towards negativity, towards self-criticism. These are habits in the brain that once they get activated, they strengthen those neural pathways. So that's one story that I think is, I mean, in the mindfulness world, everybody's on board with that. Everybody's super enthusiastic. That's what we're all about. Yeah. But in the broader education world, it's coming in a little bit, I think a little bit. Another example might be the findings on epigenetics and how our genes change their expression, whether they're turned on or off, or how much to the degree to which they express information is dependent also on our experience. Yeah. So one study, I talk about this study a lot, is that I think it was 2014, it was published, 1 day for experienced mindfulness practitioners, 1 day retreat caused a down-regulation of inflammatory genes. So pro-inflammatory genes are at the root of a lot of kind of stress-based conditions like psoriasis, eczema. So what I think what was emerging is this understanding that human beings are very malleable creatures. Also, I think another thing that's emerging is we're so deeply interconnected. So another thing that's is an example of a kind of a myth, a very strong, deeply embedded myth in our society, is the kind of sovereignty of the individual.
I love that word.
Kind of we're these individual, like almost like with these atomized units, you know, and we are we're fully responsible for our own actions, and we are and that's the basis for, well, one thing, that's the basis for our legal system. You know, our legal system sees us as independent, rational beings that has complete autonomy over our own actions. Yeah. Now, if anybody struggled to meditate sometimes, they know, you know, we can see that there's a difference between what we'd like to do and what we end up doing, you know. And if you if I think about the young boys that I work with in the prison, without fail, every single one of them had experienced a traumatic upbringing. More than 50% of them had been in the care system. A great many of them, probably all of them, experienced violence against them, and quite a lot of them had perpetrated violence. Now, what we know from the science is that kind of these kind of trauma and adversity chronically activates the stress system. It also primes our perceptual faculties to be on the lookout for threat all the time, even perceiving threat when there's not really threat. You know, I remember one time with a young guy in prison. He was actually a lovely guy, very funny guy. Kind of, I'm trying to find the kind of politically correct term. I'll just say he was wild, right? He would often end up in solitary confinement for biting people and stuff. Yeah. He was actually a really funny, quite intelligent guy. And I was doing a session, and he also, I think, probably had ADHD. But sometimes ADHD is misdiagnosed because it's actually trauma underlying, because there's just a hyperactivity. And he wouldn't stop talking. He just wouldn't stop talking. And I wasn't getting anywhere. And I started getting exasperated. And I said, I'll use a different name. I said, Johnny, can I please just finish what I was saying? In an instant, he turned, another person said, all right, okay, no worries. In an instant, he said, and I won't use the expletive in there.
We'll guess.
Yeah, he was like, who are you talking to? And he was like ready to fight immediately. And I was like, oh man, it's okay. So, you know, and I backed down.
But it is, you're right, it's a trained response. It's experience that you've had, you know, I completely, yeah.
So his amygdala's turned on. So what happens when he's out and he's also in an environment among his friends
Yeah.
or in a pub or wherever he is, and everybody's else amygdala's turned on,
Yeah.
instantly. And then what happens? Well, then he's in prison for 10 years. So the idea that a young guy like that has the same autonomy, the same agency over his actions as a young person that grows up in an environment of love and concern where their prefrontal cortex develops in a different way. So Robert Sapolsky has a wonderful book called Behave, and he looks at human behavior. And he takes a really beautiful, it's a beautiful way into it. It's a really kind of expansive treatise, if you like, and he looks at it from causes of behavior, whether good behavior or bad behavior. I see Susie asking what was the book. It's called Behave by Robert Sapolsky. I'll put that in the chat actually, just while I'm on with everyone. He looks at the causes of behavior over different timelines. So he looks at what's the cause of a behavior 30 seconds before it happens. And he looks at it from the perspective of the neurochemical activity. What's the cause of a behavior from 24 to 48 hours before it happens? And he looks at it from the perspective of hormones. What are circadian rhythms doing? What's unfolding in the body in that sense? He looks at what's the cause of a behavior over maybe a period of 3 to 6 months prior. And he looks at that through the process from the lens of neuroplasticity. What are the habits that have been built up in the brain that create certain propensities? He goes back to developmental psychology. What's the causes and conditions in birth? He actually goes back all the way 500 years ago, and he looks at culture. Wow. So there's really interesting studies looking at how people in places like Sicily or actually Scotland, where where people used to earn a livelihood through livestock farming. And in that kind of environment, what emerged was a lot of violence in these cultures. And the theory is that emerged because farmers needed to kind of have this ultimate threat. If somebody stole your livestock, you would go and kill them. And that was such a deterrent in that time. So there's these certain areas where there's kind of cultures of violence or cultures of honor killings, also in the Appalachian Mountains in America. And it suggested that there's certain cultural influences that kind of propel those behaviors forward. So I know this has been a long response to your question, but the point I want to get to is that this is just one example of where we have a tension, I think, in the Western narratives of what it means to be human, in that we have this idea of individual agency and autonomy on the one hand, but then what the science is showing is actually we're deeply interconnected beings, conditioned by all of these causes outside of us. Hundreds of years before we were born, when we were an infant, the economic social environment we're in, and I'm not arguing that I'm not arguing against individual responsibility, but I think there's a tension between these two stories that we haven't resolved yet. And I think these are the kind of things we need to explore to make progress, to move forward.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I guess we're both, there's so many people passionate about changing those stories and helping, because obviously during the teen years that, there's a lot of wiring that happens anyway. So it's almost like, is that a more malleable time for the shaping of the brain at that time? So I feel like the world would be a very different place if we, held every child in sacred trust, and they didn't have these 10, experiences and had confidence in themselves. I think the whole world there'd be a whole ripple effect. So kind of really keen on seeing mindfulness happen and bring the benefits to the younger people.
And this is we don't just to pick up on that point, Ray, I don't think we know yet. I don't think the longitudinal studies have been done, but my hope would be that sharing mindfulness with young people when they're young could serve to activate these other neurophysiological circuits that could kind of mitigate the impacts of these adverse childhood experiences. Because one of the things that's tragic, the other thing we know about the impact of trauma is the traumatic event is difficult in and of itself, but then once that kind of vicious feedback loop gets set in place and the chronic stress gets activated, the damage actually keeps being done to the brain and body. You know, so if we could start to share mindfulness with young people early, and they can have experiences of physiological safeness within themselves, have experiences of warm connection amongst their classroom community, their school community, and that becomes something that becomes kind of characterized throughout their school career. I think my hope is, and I think the science points the direction that could be could bring quite profound impacts, you know. Whereas I think at the moment, well, the studies in this area look at mindfulness. You know, a short-term program, a follow-up after 6 months, and we see a statistically significant impact, and that's great. But I think most people working in this field want to see much greater transformation, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a really good book. I think it's Professor Vanderbilt. He wrote "Trauma Shapes the Brain," and I remember being really struck by an image in that of a 2-year-old who'd had a really traumatic first 2 years of his life, and as he grew, his brain actually didn't grow. You know, it was significant, and you know. I think for people to understand that there's a physical response to stress and trauma, you know, within the body, you know, just on the way that you grow, I think that's just profound. I mean, that just that knowledge would make a change, you know, in society.
And we just had somebody on our training who completed the summer program just a year ago and is working with young people in a residential school, so a secure unit. So these young people, unfortunately for a lot of these young people, they'll end up going to Pullman prison where I worked, and these young people, their resting heart rates are about 120 beats per minute. So that's them resting, so they're in this constant chronic state of stress and threat. And what she actually found, and she took she had she got Fitbits and iPads, and through the summer program during the practices, their heart rate came down to 80 beats per minute.
Fantastic.
So the evidence is there that you can make this physiological impact through these practices, you know. And the long-term possibilities of this we don't know. So that's exciting, I think.
How do you find, I mean, it would be great if mindfulness transformed the nature of education. I mean, in your work with schools, are they getting more open to the idea of bringing mindfulness in now?
Yes, I think so. I think there was I remember some years ago, at the end of the training, I put up a slide that had the words on it: tick box or transformation. And I think we're still kind of swinging between those two possibilities, you know. So I think as things become all the rage, and becomes kind of a buzzword, that there's a if people don't really understand mindfulness or practice it themselves or haven't experienced the benefits, then it becomes something that goes in the school improvement report, you know, and something that looks good to Ofsted or whoever it might be, you know.
It's school's equivalent of a corporate social responsibility, basically.
And I think the danger with that is then the incentive or motivation is maybe somewhat different. And then the other incentives and motivations that are impinging upon the senior management team and the head teacher of the school might be trying to keep costs low, you know, rolling things out to as many young people as possible. So I think the quality can diminish as a result when that's at play. I think honestly the most powerful kind of impetus for a more transformative impact is all of the people who are on the ground who have the fire in their belly for this work, who are the passionate practitioners, you know. I think probably many people on this call, like almost, and the people that come on our training, you know, I think people within the kind of so-called mindfulness movement have a real passion for what this can mean, and there's a felt sense of what this could bring. And yeah, I think that's where the biggest impact often happens. What we often see is that there's one or two champions within a context. And I also, a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist, retired now, commented that the same thing was true in the NHS in Scotland. Like if mindfulness was doing well in a particular trust in a particular region, you'd often find that there was a psychiatrist or clinical psychologist or doctor who was really passionate about it, and so it was quite spotty. So I don't think there's a sense of
a joined up approach.
No,
does not.
Yeah.
So interested in the different ages within that context of what you're talking about. I mean, so how would you teach mindfulness to an angry 8-year-old, for instance?
An angry 8-year-old? I think first of all, my first intention would be to let him be angry. You know? Yeah. I think that's it. I mean, that's an interesting question, Marie, because sometimes people want to bring mindfulness to a child, for instance, because they are angry, you know, and they might be, there's a sense of like, maybe this will fix them, you know?
Yeah.
And there's a kind of like, right, I'm going to bring mindfulness to you, and that will solve the problem. But in that, of course, we see that's not really a mindfulness approach.
No.
The heart of mindfulness is the principles of non-fixing. Non-judgment.
No expectations.
Totally. And receptivity.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, you know, our approach within teaching with the kids program, which is for the younger ones, is not really focused on fixing anything. It's more focused on a kind of a strengths-based approach, like growing the positive capacities, you know, and in that getting kind of curious about what the blocks to that are, you know. So you know, anger is something we explore, but it's something that is it's almost like it's up to the kid if that's a reason that they want to practice mindfulness to help them deal with their anger. Like that would be my, you know. If there was another context where, for instance, a therapist or a school counsellor or somebody was working with the kid one-on-one, or a pupil support worker or somebody was working with the kid one-on-one, and they had a lot of anger, they might think, okay, I'm going to bring mindfulness to help this young person. But where I would want to start would be to just be curious and be present with the young person first. You know, especially if the anger is kind of somewhat outsized. What's going on there? And the other thing is that the anger is because of something like bullying or abuse. What we also have to remember is teaching the kid mindfulness, it's not going to be that impactful if they're going home to a situation where their stepdad is emotionally abusing them. It doesn't. It's, you know, it's. I think we're asking. I think this is where we're. You know, I think mindfulness is very empowering to the individual, but this is where I think we're asking too much of kids. To say, right, here's this empowering technique that you can manage your emotions. And like, 9-year-old shouldn't be in that situation, shouldn't be experiencing that. So we have to put some kind of boundaries to our ambitions, if you like, with this. You know, we have to recognize that actually there's other kind of social conditions that we have to think about, you know. Maybe even if we go further than that, economic conditions that we have to think about, you know, rather than seeing mindfulness as a kind of panacea. That's
a really good point. I was really struck today. I was just looking at the NHS has also just come out with a survey, and I was interested in the difference between boys and girls. I just like to just talk to you a little bit about that. So the latest stats, like 18% of 5 to 10-year-old boys have got probable mental health problems. So that's higher than the girls, because the girls are like 10%. But when you get to the 11 to 16-year-olds, it's the girls that are like 1 in 5 girls have got probable mental health problems, compared to just a lesser amount for the boys. It's almost like the first part, the boys are struggling more, and then the second part, the girls are struggling more. And I just wondered if that had been your experience in working.
And what were the ages of those? Were those 5 to 10-year-olds?
5 to 10 and 11 to 16.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just intrigued about that, because I do think there's a difference between the sexes of children and the different pressures at different times. But I was shocked at the highness. I was very saddened by the highness of the figures. But I was 1 in 5 11 to 16-year-old girls. That's a huge percentage.
Yeah, I mean, the American psychologist Jonathan Haidt has done some work looking at the impact of social media on young people, and particularly young girls. And I think what some of the research shows quite a clear relationship. And actually, my generation was kind of the lucky generation. I got into Facebook when I was in university, maybe like my second or third year of university, so I'd been like 19, 20, 21, something like that. And so in my developing brain, and the young people of my age, those kind of crucial teenage years where the brain's developing, we didn't get exposed to social media. But the people that were born after us, so maybe what age am I? I'm getting that age where you forget your age. I'm 35. So I think people who are maybe born so kind of 30-year-olds, maybe 28-year-olds and younger, they kind of grew up, maybe even a bit younger than that, but certainly 25-year-olds and younger grew up like on social media from 10, 11 years old. And according to his research, there's a very clear, quite a steep increase in mental health problems, self-harming and suicidal thoughts in young girls in the adolescent years from the kind of date that social media started to come out.
That doesn't.
Yeah, I think that's pretty concerning.
Well, I think it comes back to that whole thing about connection again in some respects, because there feels like with social media there's a disconnect. It's like what you present to the world is not actually how you are. You maybe just choose the cherry on the top or the good things, or alternatively some people just choose the bad things. But that there are somebody who might be coming across on social media as really happy, but actually be curled up in a ball, not completely trapped and not at home. So I feel like there's the energy it takes to maintain both of those places is really hard. I think so. And
this goes back again, Breedy, to like how we're not really embodying in our culture the understanding that we're developing about human beings. I mean, just a simple example is like the amount of sugar in products, and how addicting sugar is, or how bad social media is for our dopamine systems in our brain. But these things are pushed out there, Now I don't have the solutions. I'm not an advocate for kind of like some kind of intervention state by any means, but I think the world is changing so fast, and our understanding of things is changing so fast, but we're not yet, I think, very good at being wise as a society. I think we're really struggling. We struggle as individuals because we're fallible individuals. Like there's a wonderful cognitive scientist out of the University of Toronto called John Vervaeke, and one of the points that he makes really strongly is the very machinery that makes us adaptive as human beings like our cognitive biases and all these things that help us navigate the world, also make us susceptible to self-deception and self-destruction.
Yeah.
And also make us people can create companies and products that hook into these things, or political movements that hook into these things. So I don't know. I think we have our work cut out for us.
Yeah.
But I think this is really important conversations to have.
Yeah.
And then a really important area is to start with education. Like, education is a space where we can actually be quite conscious about the environment that we construct. But my sense is that education is kind of caught between these two things, where there's this kind of constant change in education. Like, there's constant new ideas and new iterations and new plans and new buzzwords and new things. But there's also this sense of deep inertia. Like, we do a lot of the things the same way that we've done for actually more than 100 years.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think it would be really encouraging if there was space for more experimentation in education, trying to implement some of what we know is really conducive to human well-being.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So if you had a magic wand and I gave you one now, what would you like to change?
If I had a magic wand. Oh.
You might need to think about that one.
That's
a hard question.
That's a big question.
It is a big question, I know, but I feel like you've really touched on the stories that need to change, and you've really touched on, the fact that we're stuck in the mud still and not moving forwards, and not recognizing, the organic nature and the malleable nature of us as human beings, and the frailties actually as well. But and how there is such a big opportunity right now for education. So I just wondered, if you were one of those, if you were the education MP, what would you do?
Okay, I thought does come to me actually. I should also say one thing, that comes up, Ree, is that I hope I haven't given too pessimistic a take tonight. Like, if we, I think actually like there's a lot of progress happening. And if you think back to maybe where we were 20 years ago in terms of our understanding of, like, even just within the space of education, like young people's needs or the impacts of trauma, or like, I know within Scotland and very much so in Glasgow, there's a big emphasis on nurturance and like promoting kind of nurturing schools. So there's a lot of beneficial stuff happening. It's just maybe I get overexcited and a kind of fireful anger, and makes me want things to change immediately. But in terms of, I think in terms of changing education, the one thing that comes to mind, and this is easier said than done, and I don't necessarily know how this would be done, but the one thing that comes to mind is to free up teachers and empower teachers and allow teachers, and like trusting teachers, because I feel like teachers, the education system is so oppressive to teachers actually, in terms of what they need to get through. I think it can be quite restrictive on what the curriculum needs to be taught. I know my brother was training to be an English teacher for a while. When he was in his probation year in high school, he was seeing 350 kids a week in different classes, because he was covering so many different classes. And he told me this experience he had when a young girl came to him, and he could tell from what she said about homework that there was some issues in her home life. And he could also get the sense from her that she would have talked to him. She was kind of leaning into that connection. And he was so overwhelmed with his workload and so stressed that he just didn't have the capacity within him. And he told me this with a lot of regret. He just didn't have the capacity to be there for her in that moment. So when we have an education system that actually, I think, sadly, is a lot more concerned with the numbers in a spreadsheet, and the numbers that's such a powerful force, I think. I think if that was removed and teachers were more free to teach what they thought was viable to teach,
or
it could be very beneficial.
or just to have the capacity to be responsive to what is in
Yeah.
front of them, and have the time and space and the resources. Yeah, absolutely. So you haven't come across as a negative. I think it's important to look at what's happening right now today. But I think it might be good just to, do you have any stories about how mindfulness has changed the lives of young offenders? Or you got some, a couple of anecdotes from your work in the prisons?
Unfortunately, in my work, I didn't get much of a chance to kind of stay connected to the young men. So there was a lot of special connections that emerged, and I can share stories of how mindfulness impacted them while I was working with them, and the impact it had, you know. I can remember one young man sharing a story of how this is a guy who was on the second session was visibly very, very distressed and very, very angry, and kind of engaged with the mindfulness practice for about 3 minutes, and then towards the end of or halfway through the session, started having a fight with the prison officer, like a verbal kind of spat, and you could feel the tension. But these were two big men, the prison officer and the young guy, two big guys, ready to come to blows, and he was sent away to his cell. And I thought, you know, lost him, like he won't be back, you know. And but I went down to see him in his cell, and this was the thing that I often found was quite powerful with these young guys. Often they would kind of drop out the course. That was it would happen. And if I went down and spoke to them and just said, listen, man, I really want you to be here. I'm really enjoying you being on this course. Will you come back next week? And my sense was that just showing that care was what would bring them back. And that guy, between him and me, we developed a real strong kind of bond and friendship. And he spoke about, this was a PhD student was doing her evaluating the impact of the program, and in the interview with this young man, he shared how there was a time when he was about to have a fight with another guy in the prison, and he was going to go and he wanted to smash up his own spell, and he wanted to smash up the guy. But he sat down, he did a little bit of breathing, a little bit of mindfulness, and he just went to the guy's cell, had a chat with him, shook his hand, and that was the end of it.
Brilliant.
So, there was definitely material impact.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I remember just going back to what you were saying earlier, there's a really beautiful video from the Centre for Council where they have a whole load of inmates in a big circle in the prison yard, and there's a speaker in the middle, and she's literally saying, take one step forward if this has happened to you. So if you had violence as a child or you had abuse as a child, and literally she's just talking, and every time they step in, and at the end of kind of the video, there's nobody on the outer circle, and they're all pretty much bunched up around, I think, it was just a very visual representation of why we end up, and just thinking, how much more impactful it would be to kind of bring mindfulness in, and then not have to fill prisons up with people who haven't been treated well and don't now have the resources to be able to meet life, actually,
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel really strongly about that. Yeah. So before we just move on to questions from everyone here today, what are you hoping to achieve with youth mindfulness? What's the big vision?
Yeah, well, the vision is to continue training educators and people out in the community working in the programs that we developed, and we have plans this year to start a kind of an online membership community for our graduates, so that people can continue to kind of connect with each other and continue to develop their understanding and their expertise. And I think, if I'm honest, really, probably the longer term hope is that we can nurture the kind of community of people doing this work. There's kind of, because for a time the model within youth mindfulness has been okay, we develop these programs, and then we'll go and teach you how to do these programs, and then off you go. And I think now what I get more and more a sense of is that the expertise out in the community of people doing this work is kind of dwarfs my personal individual knowledge and understanding. So actually the whole community of people out there doing this work, everybody's developing so much knowledge and so much understanding that I think if so it's not so much about me or the other youth mindfulness trainers being like, here, we know how to do this stuff, go and do this. We want to be kind of the first step, the first block, and then have this community of people that keep sharing ideas and keep sharing their understanding and knowledge, you know. So and I think that's how this field can develop.
The ripple effect, need an army of ambassadors.
Exactly.
Well, I'd like to open it up to see if anyone has any specific questions that they'd like to ask Michael today. Just whizzing down the chat to see if there's any. So we have one here from Sarah. I really like your vision and philosophy of what education should be. How can I go about bringing youth mindfulness to Northern Ireland? There you go.
Well, one thing you can do is come on our training. Come on either whether you want to work with 7 to 11-year-olds, you can come on our kids program training, or if you want to work with adolescents and young adults, you come on our summer program training. So that gives you the kind of tools to start bringing these programs to young people. The other thing you could do is I see Veronica Ellis on this call. You could connect with Veronica. I think Veronica's in Belfast. So I know that there's quite a few people from Northern Ireland that we trained and are doing great work. So make connections and get trained and then get out there, go for it.
Brilliant. There's also a question from Martin, who's got a friend who works in primary schools with a program called Each Amazing Breath, but he'd like to know how your programs work.
Yeah, so I haven't heard of the program Each Amazing Breath, so I can't speak to that particular program. Our program, so our kids program, I'll try my best to give a concise kind of explanation of it, is a 16-lesson program that looks to kind of build mindfulness in a kind of sequential developmental way. So one of the things that's really important when you're teaching mindfulness to the young kids is that they have a motivation to do it. When you teach mindfulness to adults, generally speaking, if you do an 8-week course for adults, they'll already have a motivation, an intention to be there. Maybe they want to sleep better, they want to stress less, whatever it might be. When you walk into a room full of 30 kids, they don't have any motivation or intention to practice mindfulness. In fact, mindfulness, sitting still, watching the breath for 5 minutes, to most kids probably sounds like really, really boring. Right? So you have to work on actually the first thing being nurturing the intention and motivation. And so that's kind of the theme of our first lesson, but that kind of runs through the whole of the kids program. So, and there's lots of different ways that we bring that to life. Like later on in the program, we start to bring in some mindful movement. One of the nice things about mindful movement is it kind of, especially for young kids, they kind of need to move. They're kind of built to move at that age. They're built to move. They're built to be playful. So if you've done some mindful movement and then they come to sitting, the sitting actually feels quite pleasant, you know, if you come to do a little practice. But if they've just been sitting in a maths lesson for 50 minutes behind the desk, and then you say, okay, now we're going to do a mindfulness of breathing practice, all they're going to do is just feel restless, you know. So we bring a little bit of movement. We bring in a lot of games, and we bring in a lot of fun videos and kind of kinesthetic activities. So one of the things we try to do is bring mindfulness, like concepts of mindfulness, like the idea of allowing, for instance. We try to bring that to life, not just talk at the young people, but actually bring it to life Like we explore mindfulness of difficult emotions. We use an ice cube on the hand for the kids to actually experience difficult sensations and their reactions to them. And then we do a little mindfulness practice. They do it again, and they can see that when they're mindful, they're less reactive. They don't tense up so much. They don't scream. They don't make funny faces, So there's lots of little kind of fun little games, hooks, and activities that we pepper throughout the program that kind of brings them in. And the other thing that it kind of moves through these sequential themes. So the first 6 lessons of the program really focus on embodied awareness, which is really the heart. It's really the heart of the practice. And then when we have that embodied present moment awareness, we can turn towards the cultivation of gratitude. We can turn towards awareness of difficult thoughts, difficult emotions, so that kind of metacognitive capacity. And then we can turn towards the cultivation of kindness. So that's kind of how the structure of the program unfolds. And with the summer program, as I kind of alluded to tonight, we found we needed to take a different approach. So we have lots of fun activities in it as well. We have one of the things that we put in the summer program that was surprising to us, that I didn't again think that this would go down so well with adolescents of all ages and young adults. But games, like silly games, they love playing games. I would have thought like 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds would be too cool for school. But give them like a packet of spaghetti and some marshmallows and tell them build the highest tower you can. They're loving it, and adults as well, actually.
I'd like that.
Yeah, so like and injecting as much positive emotion as possible. This is another big influence on us, is the work of Barbara Fredrickson. And one of the things that her research on positive emotions shows is that positive emotions are the kind of fuel by which human beings connect with each other. If you think of your best friends, those relationships arise often through these shared experience of mutual experiences of positive emotions, of laughing together, of showing interest together, of being calm and warm together, whatever it might be, But it's positive emotions, and the amazing thing is the research is now showing how this unfolds at a kind of a behavior, not just a behavioral, but a biological level. So whether our oxytocin levels go in sync, whether our brain levels go in sync. So positive emotion when you're teaching mindfulness to teenagers is massive, because what that then builds is a sense of connection amongst everyone. And then when you get a sense of connection, what happens is they feel safe. Like human beings feel safe through feeling connected to others. So if they feel safe, then they're ready to learn. Then they're ready to be receptive. If they don't feel safe, what actually happens is their attention is not really focused on the learning. Their attention is like on the lookout for threat, for signs of judgment from another person, whatever it may be. So safeness is really, really paramount. And positive emotion is a great way into that. And then actually with the young people, if you've got that there, the learning actually comes quite easy. Again, we use a lot of these kind of fun activities and different ways to bring things to life, but that's the essential part. And the important thing is, if you don't have that there, if the young people don't feel safe, forget it. No mindfulness learning is taking place. They're not learning anything. That's my experience. And the other thing is that, sadly, I think for quite a lot of young people, safeness is not the common experience in school. It's just not. And not the level of safeness for the kind of work you're trying to do in mindfulness, which is deeper, which is trying to connect young people with themselves, with maybe where their vulnerability is, maybe what they're worried about, what they're stressed about, what they're hopeful for. This is more personal than learning about trigonometry or Pythagoras. So you could learn about that from a slightly less, a slightly guarded place maybe, but you can't really engage in mindfulness from a guarded place.
That's really profound. I think if there's just one thing that people take away from tonight is remembering that, actually, that whole safety thing. I think there was a question about do you have tips for engaging a teenager to give mindfulness practices a try, but you've just answered that quite well with the engaging and the games. But there's another question about, do you find that teenagers respond to mindfulness in nature?
It's not something that I've done myself, or whoever is asking that question. So I haven't actually been in a situation where I'm taking young people out into nature and doing mindfulness with them. But I know a lot of our graduates do, and I see a lot of power and potential in that approach.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to me because I know for me personally, you know, I think probably most of us in this call can resonate this. When you're out in nature, or you slow down a little bit and you're out in the woods or you're in a park or somewhere that's beautiful, it feels like you can actually, something shifts in your physiology. You can slow down, you connect, you're off screens.
Yeah.
Maybe the movement of trees or the sounds, it just, I don't know. I remember one time when I was on retreat, somebody saying to me, like, it was actually with some monks who were working with young people, and they said, never ever suggest to young people, let's go for a walk. Like teenagers, they never want to go for a walk. See, me, a walk sounds like quite a nice idea, but teenagers are like that. So I honestly don't know. I don't know. I think I would guess it could work really beautifully, but I've not done it myself. I don't know.
No, absolutely. I think it's a bit like suggesting like sitting still, isn't it? Going for a walk to a teenager, you know, or a family outing. They're like, what? Why would I want to do that? On what planet?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So one very last question before we do our closing meditation, just still sticking to teenagers really. So if you have any age child, actually up to a young adult who is, how do you hook them into even trying in the first place?
Yeah, I'm just thinking to the kind of approach we take in the summer program. So we in the summer program we take quite a long time before we actually get into mindfulness practice. So we often begin with some activities that are really focused on social connection. So like the marshmallow tower thing that I talked about, like that would be one thing that we would start with, you know. We would also look at group agreements. Even before that, when we recruit young people to a program, we start with like a kind of a kind of meeting with them, and actually hearing from them, like the questions I shared, like, you know, what stresses you out? Do you ever feel judged in school? And we don't spend a lot of time selling mindfulness or talking it up, because again, it's just like it doesn't really connect. We want to spend more time listening. Our experience is that young people at that age, they're more interested in, like, they're more inclined to you rather than what you say. So if they feel good with you, they feel kind of at ease, they're much more likely to kind of buy you. If you talk up mindfulness as this great thing, because it's just like they're getting that all the time.
Yeah.
So we focus on the kind of relationship connection first, and then we go into some particular kind of explorations of what the mind is, you know. We explore happiness and that we want to have happiness. I don't really have time to explain all the activities, but we explore, okay, that the mind is actually important to happiness. We use a clip from the film The Shining. Where the wee boy's on his tricycle cycling around. And you get that music and you get that tension. We don't actually show the bit with the two wee girls flash up on the screen. Even though it's just two wee girls, it's still like
scary.
Too much. It's just too much.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a bit unfair in twins, isn't it? Why are twins so like horrifying to us? But anyway, so I cut the music and ask the young people, okay, what did you notice there? What did you experience? This is one of the other principles that we have played in the summer program. Always be teaching at the level of feeling, at the level of the body. So what was the feeling? And they share, anxious, I felt stressed, anything like that. And then we show the same clip, but this time we play Eye of the Tiger over it. So we change the music.
Yeah.
You know, so it's the Rocky kind of theme tune. And now the experience is totally different. The feeling is totally different.
Yeah.
And what this is just an analogy that the music in these clips is analogies to our mind. Music, our mind is like the soundtrack for our life. So the situation can be entirely exactly the same. Everything's going the same. But whatever mind you bring into it influences your experiences of, you know. So that's kind of a fundamental kind of conceptual step, if you like. And then the next point is, and then we explore, you know, what is the mind, and we engage in a few things to explore how would they like to kind of influence their mind, you know, and we have some activities that bring that to life in quite a concrete, visceral way, you know. And then it's there we start to explore, okay, well, there's this thing called mindfulness that can actually change the dials of the mind, that can change habits. So it takes, we find that you really need to go slowly in putting in that really solid foundation. And that's just what we found as a kind of a tried and tested way. With some young people, you could just say, hey, this thing really helps you sleep better, it helps you stress less, you know, it'll help with procrastination. Do you want to give it a go? You know, and they could get into it. But for the most part, to take all of the young people that you're working with, we find that that's helpful.
Comes back to connection again. We started there and we're ending there. Thank you so much for that. So much to be with. So I think it would be good just to have a 5-minute settling, just to let all of that kind of percolate through our systems. Michael, are you happy to just talk us through a 5 minutes meditation?
Yeah, I can guide us through that.
Yeah, cool. Bless you.
I would just say, I really appreciate everyone being on the call tonight. It's a real privilege to be able to share with you, and I appreciate you guys sticking around and listening to me talk for so long.
It's gone really quickly, actually.
Great. We can maybe start to sound the bell. So just about 5 minutes, Ree, yeah?
Yeah, 5 minutes would be good. Okay. Thank you.
So it might be nice to begin this practice just by bringing awareness to sound. Just noticing the sounds that you can hear in your environment in this moment. It might be very quiet. There might be some repetitive sounds, or unpredictable sounds. See if it's possible to notice that each moment of sounds is unique. It's fresh, it's brand new. Maybe noticing that sounds are constantly changing. And bringing the same quality of this gentle awareness to the body. No need to make any great effort, just allowing a kind of diffuse awareness throughout the body. The legs and feet, the arms and hands, the torso, head and face. This body composed of trillions of cells. Each one alive. So just resting here, experiencing being alive. Each moment fresh, brand new.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's been an absolute privilege to have you join us this evening. It brings a lot of hope knowing that there are such amazing work. There's such amazing work going on with children and with young offenders and our young people, and as you say, an important conversation tonight that needs to ripple out to all sectors of society. So I've just put it in the chat box here, ways to get more information about youth mindfulness and about the heart movement. To find out more about the resources there. The heart movement, we're launching a mindfulness for parents short course in April, a 2-week course, which is being run by Veronica, who was in the chat tonight. And you'd be most welcome to join our community within the app. There's lots of great resources from Youth Mindfulness on their website. And together we can make an impact on the lives of our young people. And that feels like a beacon to aim for. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have this 90 minutes with being connected with you all. And I hope you found it useful. And look forward to seeing you at the next Heart Movement Conversations. And Michael, yeah, bless you for your time and your energy and your heart and your passion and all that you walk with.
Thank you everyone. It's been really, really fun tonight. And thanks Ree for holding space and giving me space to waffle on for a long time. And if anyone wants to get in touch, they can get me at info@youthmindfulness.org.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Cheers, guys.
And gentle evening to you all.